Hello, hello. Good evening. How's everybody doing? Today we're back with another music stream, another Roxx Music Academy stream. I completely forgot that it was already September. I was gonna stream ZZZ today, but I honestly don't quite feel like playing games tonight. So, good timing, I guess. Today we get to talk about Megadeth, which you guys voted on the poll on Discord. It was the most voted. We're going to follow the same format as last time. However, as there are like more than twice as many albums to cover, or actually maybe exactly twice as many albums to cover, we won't be going into as much detail about each of the albums. I'm going to talk more about some of them, less about others. I'm going to pinpoint some songs that I really like, as well as songs that are important, regardless of how I feel about them. And I'm going to point out things that I don't like about each of the albums. Good Night Inyabi, my favorite Megadeth lyric, is in Symphony of Destruction, where Dave says, "You try to take his pulse." Yeah, that's totally what he says. Anyways, quick prayer, and then we'll get into the ranking. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, of the Holy Spirit. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Alright, so I've got the goods here. Now, last time, I don't remember how many we did. Yeah, we did just 5 tiers. So I'm going to delete E and F here, because I don't want it to be too much information. Are we going to be able to talk about rock in Japan, or is that too long? Not in this stream. I'm going to do a stream eventually just to talk about that. And in that stream, I'll be able to talk about a few bands, not just one, that aren't really worth like a stream just for them, because maybe they don't have enough material, or maybe they're just not that relevant. So we'll be able to talk about, you know, more than one band. I want to do a stream just for that. We're not going to be talking about that today, especially since it's not really related to Megadeth at all. Megadeth is about as successful in Japan as they are elsewhere. Maybe even a bit less. So, you know, it's not that relevant. But yeah, we got the albums here. Let's put them in chronological order. So we got Peace Cell, Killing Is My Business. Then we got Peace Cells. Then we got So Far So Good So What. Then we got Rest in Peace. Then we got Countdown to Extinction. Then we've got Euthanasia. Then we've got Trust. Then we've got Risk. Then we've got The World Needs a Hero. Then we've got The System Has Failed. Then it's United Abominations and the Game. 13, Super Collider, Dystopia, and The Sick, the Dying, and the Dead. I forgot exactly when Hidden Treasures came out. 1995. Okay, so that would have been after Euthanasia and before Cryptic Writings. Yes, that is correct. Okay. All right. So again, just a recap on the tiers and what they mean. S tier is reserved for legendary albums, albums that are either nigh on flawless or that they just have just such a big impact on the genre that it's unquestionable. Like literally you cannot place them any lower because they are genre defining and extremely influential. A tier is for really good albums that are worth listening, definitely worth listening to from front to back without skipping any songs. B tier is for average albums in relation to the rest of the band's material. So albums that are maybe not necessarily worth listening to front to back unless you're a big fan and you've already listened to all the S and A albums. But that definitely have quite a few good songs, quite a few hits, or at least have a lot of very interesting ideas. C tier is for albums that missed the mark, so they may still have one or two redeemable songs or even some cool ideas that just weren't executed as well, but they're generally not worth listening to, at least not front to back, unless you're a huge fan of the band. So it's songs that you're at most going to be looking at one or two songs that are worthwhile. And then D tier are just albums that completely failed at what they sought to accomplish. So albums that either have close to no redeemable songs, or that just have a really bad premise, or that stray too far away from what the band is supposed to be, or, you know, that set out a goal and failed to accomplish it in any way. There's still going to be albums in D tier that have songs that are worthwhile. I don't think Megadeth has any albums that are awful. Okay, I can tell you that right off the bat. There's some that come a little close, but I wouldn't call any of them awful, as in you should never listen to this under any circumstance. So the albums that are in D tier are still going to have some things that are worthwhile. It's just not going to hold a candle to anything in the above tiers. Yeah, so those are the criteria. I hope it's clear enough. We can make it more clear as we go, as we discuss. Like I said, we're not going to be talking as much about each of the albums. I'm just going to I'm not just going to rank them either. I'm going to talk about them. And with these streams, I don't want to just read the Wikipedia page and, you know, spit out the obvious, the things that everybody knows. Like, oh, this album was the band's biggest commercial success, or this one was the most critically acclaimed, or whatever. I'm giving you my take. I'm going to tell you what I like about the album, what I don't like about the album, what could have made the album better, and how it fares compared to the previous album, especially, right? So let's begin. We begin by talking about Killing Is My Business, okay? Except we don't, because Megadeth doesn't begin with Killing Is My Business. Megadeth begins with No Life Till Leather, which is a demo tape for Metallica from when Dave Mustaine was still in Metallica. And if you go to Kill 'Em All's Wikipedia page, you will find that in the credits for the songwriting, on like half of the songs in this album, if Wikipedia would cooperate. There we go. Here, on the credits for about half the songs in this album, you'll find the name Dave Mustaine. He's here in the Four Horsemen. He's here in Jump in the Fire. He's here in Phantom Lord. He's here in Metal Militia. Now, why is that relevant? Well, obviously Dave Mustaine is the lead singer and rhythm guitar player, although he also does leads for Megadeth. Except while he's credited for being in this album, he is not playing in it. He was kicked out of the band beforehand, and his guitar parts were played instead by Kirk Hammett, who's been on the band since. Now, why is that relevant? Well, because Megadeth's career is basically a revenge arc against Metallica. And you need to understand that, even as the biggest fan and the biggest, like, Dave Mustaine shill, it's simply impossible to deny that Megadeth's entire career is a revenge arc. And a revenge arc that never fully completed, or at least that never fully ballooned, but a revenge arc nonetheless. So this first album, Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good, is written by a heroin-fueled Dave Mustaine, who is pissed off because he got kicked from the band that would become the biggest band in the history of heavy metal. Although he didn't know that at the time yet, he would know very soon, because by the time this album was released in 1985, Metallica had already released Kill 'Em All, featuring 4 of Mustaine's songs, despite him telling not to use his songs. And then they had already released Ride the Lightning as well, which was pretty successful. You know, there's plenty of hit songs in there that are still played today, plenty. From Creeping Death to For Whom the Bell Tolls, you know, staples of thrash metal. So Metallica were already beginning to make a splash, and Dave was here scrambling, juggling his heroin addiction with his hatred for Metallica, and trying to keep a band together for 2 weeks in order to record an album. And what came of that is Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good. So as you can see, this is a very short album with a runtime of 31 minutes and 10 seconds. 8 songs, 4 on each side. And honestly, it's okay. It's pretty good. I'm not gonna say it's okay. It's a pretty good album. This is probably Megadeth's thrashiest album. Although you could also make an argument for the second album, which is Peace Sells. But this is probably Megadeth's thrashiest album, and it's also one of their most technical albums. It is not the most technical album. We're going to talk about that when we get to Rest in Peace. But it's definitely up there. Because this album is literally just everything that Dave was playing in Metallica, but twice as fast and twice as difficult. You have songs like Love to Death, which has a riff that's in 4/4, but it doesn't sound like it's in 4/4 because of how broken up the rhythm is. You have songs like Killing Is My Business, which has, you know, very aggressive lyrics, very fast riffing. Rattlehead as well, very aggressive, very fast. Chosen One is a little bit groovier. Looking Down the Cross is a very eerie song with a very, like, dark themes and very dark ambience to it. And then Mechanics is literally just the 4 Horsemen from Kill 'Em All, but, like, 50% faster, and with changed lyrics, and without the Sweet Home Alabama part in the middle. So yeah, Mechanics probably synthesizes what this album is all about the best, and I think that's what makes it such a good closer to it. It's literally, hey, we're Metallica, but faster and better. And if you're comparing this album to Metallica's first two albums, while it doesn't have the highest of highs, I think it's a very consistently good effort. It doesn't have any hits like, you know, Creeping Death or Seek and Destroy or anything like that. Doesn't have any extremely iconic riffs or anything like that besides the, you know, Mechanics riff maybe. Like the bridge riff. But it's a very, very solid front to back thrash record. So if you really like thrash metal, well, you've probably already heard this album if you really like thrash metal. But if you're really trying to get into thrash metal, this is a good place to start. Because with Megadeth's future output, there's going to be thrash, but there's also going to be a lot more caveats. There's going to be songs and elements here and there that aren't quite raw thrash. Every single record starting from the second one is going to be less thrashy than this one. At least if you're a thrash purist, you know? But we'll talk about that when we get to it. So I'm going to put this album in B tier. And I know I said I wasn't going to talk as much about each of the albums. I'm not. But since this was the first one, I had to give it a little bit of a longer introduction, because this is going to be the foundation from which the rest of the story is going to be crafted. So now hopefully you have a good understanding of why this band started and what their starting point was, what they set out to be. They're a bunch of drug-fueled renegades that set out to be the biggest band in heavy metal history, or at least just bigger than Metallica. And they're not going to achieve either of those things by the end of their journey, but damn, they're going to do some damage. So let's talk about the second album. Speaking of damage, we have Peace Sells, but who's buying? Now, if you have a look at this page here, you'll notice that the first album has very bad chart positions and no certifications whatsoever. And then you go down to the next album, and you see that it's RIAA Platinum, even though it also doesn't have really great chart positions. Well, here's the thing. This album was released by Capitol Records, which is a much bigger label than Combat was. And this album is a staple of thrash metal, okay? This album is, since we're going to be making a lot of Metallica comparisons, this album is Megadeth's Master of Puppets. It was released on the same year of 1986, good old 1986, and it's also a relatively short album, just 5 minutes longer than the previous at 36 minutes and 12 seconds. And it's also got 8 tracks. So let's talk about what's different from this album compared to the previous. Well, the guitar player is the same, as is the drummer. The lead guitarist being, what's his name? The drummer is Gar Samuelson. The guitar player is Chris Poland. There we go. That's his name. Chris Poland and Gar Samuelson were very much from a jazz fusion background before getting into metal. So this album has a little bit more of an input from them and a little bit less of the pure unadulterated rage and hatred speed from the first one. So this album definitely has a little bit more nuance, and I think that Chris Poland's guitar playing with his little bits and pieces of jazz fusion influence really comes to light here. Let me switch to dark mode so you can still see the chat on stream. I think that's better, right? Let me know if it's worse. I can switch it back to light mode if it's more difficult to read. You guys tell me. But yeah, you can hear more of Gar Samuelson and Chris Poland in this album, which is cool, because we're going to see, starting from now, the revolving door of drummers and guitarists in Megadeth, each of which, each new addition bringing slightly different influences and, you know, to varying degrees. Some bring a lot of influence, and then they don't last in the band. Some bring very little influences, and then they last longer in the band, but the band ends up getting a bit stale. So we're going to see both of those things going forward. And with Gar Samuelson and Chris Poland being on this album, we have some of that. So we have some tracks that have very peculiar sounding things. Like The Conjuring, Bad Omen has a extremely ominous intro that is very, like, unorthodox in terms of the note choices and all that, some of the chords. And I know it's not all Chris Poland, a lot of it is Mustaine. Mustaine has a very unorthodox style of guitar playing. So yeah. The highlights of the album, like the hits, are definitely Wake Up Dead and Peace Sells. Peace Sells was the intro song for one of the MTV shows for a while, with the bass intro. And Wake Up Dead is still a staple of the Megadeth set, even today. It's a very good song. Although it is also very, like, it has a very unorthodox structure, and that's something that we're going to be seeing a lot from Megadeth. Songs that have a very unorthodox structures. Like, Wake Up Dead is basically an instrumental song, but it has a little verse in the beginning that is basically a skit of a guy coming home drunk, and laying next to his wife, trying not to wake her up. And then there's, you know, some more vocals towards the end, but the body of the song is almost entirely instrumental. So it's a very unorthodox type of composition. And the same can be said about a lot of the other tracks in here. Good Morning Black Friday, The Conjuring, they all have, like, very linear, non-repeating compositions and arrangements that are atypical of metal, even at the time and also now. Was it some kind of tradition, or were they that hard to work with? I'd say they were that hard to work with. Like, there's, like, the reasons for why each person left or joined Megadeth are way too convoluted and lengthy to explain in a stream like this. But most of the time it boiled down to one of, like, three things. It was either just the guy was too high to play and to go on tour or to record, so they had to boot him because he was just, you know, on too many drugs all the time. The guy had some kind of beef with Dave and did something, you know, that Dave didn't like, so Dave kicked him out of the band. Or the guy wanted too much input into the music and wanted to take the band in the direction that Dave didn't agree with, so Dave kicked him from the band. it's usually one of those three things: drugs, doing something Dave doesn't like, and trying to make Megadeth your band instead of Dave's band. Or at least, trying to make Megadeth a group project instead of a dictatorship headed by Lord Mustaine. And I say that it kind of sounds pejorative, but Mustaine is the heart and soul of Megadeth. So if you try to take it away from him, it becomes something else, and that something else, as we're going to see later down the road, that something else is never as good. It's always worse. So just leave Dave at the helm, even if he's grumpy, even if he's annoying, even if he's rude. Just leave him at the helm, because the guy knows what he's doing. Okay. Dave Mustaine is like one of the goats of rhythm guitar playing in heavy metal. So just let the guy cook, okay? But anyways, nevertheless, Peace Sells is a legendary album. It's a staple of thrash metal. It's genre defining. It's arguably Megadeth's thrashiest album, although the first is more raw, like hardcore inspired thrash. This one is more intricate, almost edging into what would eventually be called technical thrash, which is a genre that would absolutely not exist without Megadeth. So this is Megadeth basically pioneering technical thrash metal, which is characterized by, complex riffs, odd time signatures, basically some elements of progressive metal, which didn't exist yet, but progressive rock, and jazz fusion kind of implemented into thrash. Or at least, very crude and evil bastard variations of those concepts. Just very technical, which is where the name comes from. Things that are very difficult to play. Honestly, that's the thing that defines the genre. So again, highlights of the album: Wake Up Dead, Peace Sells. My personal favorite, though, My Last Words, the closing track. This is a banger, okay? Don't skip this one. Make sure you listen all the way to the end so you don't miss out on this one. This is my favorite song from the album. I think Devil's Island is also a very remarkable track, so make sure to listen to the last songs on both sides of this one, okay? And because all of that I just said, Peace Sells is an easy S tier. Okay, anything below this is cap. Now we're going to talk about the third album, So Far So Good So What, which is also certified platinum. And you can see that it has higher chart placements than Peace Sells. However, one thing that I must note is that the only reason So Far So Good So What has higher chart placements than Peace Sells is because of the fame that Peace Sells brought to Megadeth. Because by itself, So Far So Good So What is not that notorious of an album. It's far from being a bad album, as we'll talk about soon. But So Far So Good So What suffers from a very chronic problem that isn't its fault. And it's like, the problem is that it's standing in between two giants. Because you have Peace Sells, which is a genre-defining technical thrash metal album, and Megadeth's first platinum record. And then right after So Far So Good So What, you have Rust in Peace, which is Megadeth's magnum opus, as we'll discuss soon. And arguably the best heavy metal record of all time. That's a, argument that a lot of people are going to disagree with, but certainly the best thrash metal album of all time. I don't think that a lot of people are going to disagree with that. unless they are massive Slayer fans, in which case they will just shout and scream at you incoherently. But, you know, we'll get to that soon. So let's talk about So Far So Good So What. First of all, new drummer, no guitar player. Chuck Baylor, Jeff Young, respectively. Those are names you do not need to memorize because they're only going to show up on this album, and they're going to be right out the door, right out the other side of the revolving door, soon. So you don't need to memorize them. They are not remarkable whatsoever. They have basically no input on this album. Compositionally, no input at all lyrically, and honestly, their playing is not remarkable enough to be talked about. So what do we have to talk about when it comes to this album? So Far So Good So What? Well, one thing to note is that the album opens up with a 3.5-minute instrumental called Into the Lungs of Hell, which is a very old song. I believe it's something that Mustaine had already been working on since the Metallica days. And it's something that I'm only pointing out because Megadeth very, very rarely does instrumentals. So it's a curious addition, especially as the opening track. And you'll probably want to listen to the original mix of this album, because the 2004 remaster has some like MIDI trumpets added to this song that are really not it. Like they literally sound like they're from Pokemon Emerald, like MIDI synths, sound fonts. So I'm not gonna talk about the remixes and the remastered editions because it's, that's a can of worms that I don't really want to open. But I'm just gonna say 9 times out of 10 the original mixes and masters are better when it comes to Megadeth albums. So if you have to pick and choose, I just say go with the originals. You're probably going to have a better time. Okay? Like you're trading off maybe, slightly like quieter. There's like slightly quieter, maybe a little bit more mono, like a little bit less stereo spacing. But at the same time, the vocals are so much better, drum sounds are so much better. Like the remixes and remasters, they often retract a lot of stuff. They re-recorded vocals. They added like MIDI sounds or new effects to sounds. They re-recorded drums or added MIDI drums. It's just not great. They have some upsides to them. There's a few things that are better, but generally speaking, the original mixes and masters are much, much better. Anyways, so let's talk about this album. This album is very weird. It's almost impressive how unremarkable it is, while still being very good. Because you have songs like Set the World on Fire, Mary Jane, 502, Liar, and Hook and Mouth, which is literally like 80% of the album. And all of these are good songs, but none of them are hits. None of them are staples of the Megadeth catalog. So it leaves us with In My Darkest Hour, basically. Which is the only song from this album, that is still played live at all. And it's a song that's, Megadeth's first quote-unquote ballad, although I wouldn't exactly call it a ballad. Like, it has an acoustic intro, and that's it. It kicked like less than a minute into the song, it already kicks into a heavy guitar riff, and then halfway through the song it turns into a fully fledged thrash song. So I wouldn't call it a ballad just because it has a little bit of an acoustic guitar in the intro, although I have heard it called that. But it is the best song on this album by far. It's a song written in honor of Cliff Burton, The instrumentals, at least, not necessarily the lyrics. The lyrics are about something else. But yeah, it's by far the best song on this album. So honestly, this is an album that you can skip if you're not a huge Megadeth fan. It's still a very good album. Okay, all of these songs are really enjoyable and really good. But the only track from here that is like a really big staple of the Megadeth catalog is In My Darkest Hour. I think I have heard 502 and Mary Jane from this album, and that's it, aside from My Darkest Hour, of course. Yeah. The songs are like, you know, kind of give or take. Like, they're good songs, and they are, you know, still very thrashy and aggressive for the most part. Mary Jane has some very interesting melodic ideas. Liar has, you know, very cool riffs. And all that. But none of them are, you know, absolute bangers, except for In My Darkest Hour. So because all of that... Good evening, Jug. Because all of that, I'm going to put So Far So Good So What in B tier as well. It's a solid album. It's definitely worth listening to, but it's not something you have to rush towards, you know? You can let it cook, you can let it marinate, you can come to it after you're done listening to some of the other albums that we're going to talk about. You're not missing out on much if you decide to skip it. Alright, next up is Rust in Peace. Okay, so this is going to be a bit of a rant, okay? Because this album is definitely an album that I have to talk about at greater length than the rest. So let me take a sip from my drink before we get started. Alright, first things first. Listen to the original mix. Don't listen to the remaster, okay? Don't listen to the remaster of this album. It's just not worth it. I'm not going to go into more detail than that, I already explained, but just listen to the originals. Okay, this album is the best thrash metal album, and by extension, the best technical thrash metal album in history. And there is a very strong argument to be made that it is also, if not the best, one of the best heavy metal albums of all time. This album is a 40 minutes and 44 seconds of relentless riffing and soloing. Some of the most technical to date, and also just overall the most intricate and quality compositions in the history of metal and the history of thrash. This is just an album that is like a mandatory listen if you like metal at all, okay? If you like to listen to heavy metal, this album is mandatory for you. If you have never heard of this album, you don't get to call yourself a metal fan, a metalhead. Like, it's just a mandatory. Even if your favorite metal genre is the most opposite thing to thrash metal ever. Like, even if your favorite metal genre is nu metal, or something like that, you still need to listen to this album, because this album is just that goated, okay? So let's talk a little bit about each of the tracks in here. This one I'm going to go over most of the tracks. Holy Wars is probably Megadeth's most notorious song, or it's definitely second place. There's one that we're going to talk about a bit later that might be first place. But I would argue that it is Megadeth's most notorious song, and it is generally considered to be their best also. It's a staple of thrash metal with some classic riffing that would go on to influence and to be ripped off for decades to come. It's got an insane amount of soloing. It's got cool lyrics. It's fast. It's got tempo changes. It's got key changes. It's the whole package. And last album, we didn't have to talk about the guitar player, and we didn't have to talk about the drummer. Now, starting with this album, we have to talk about them a lot. Because this was the first album with guitarist Marty Friedman, whom you may have heard of, and drummer Nick Menza. Now, this would be Megadeth's longest lasting lineup. It would last until 1999, if I'm not mistaken. So we're going to have like 5 albums with this lineup, and that's the longest streak ever with the same lineup. And this album is pretty much the reason for it, because although this is pretty much all Mustaine, you can see that there's like 2 albums that have like that are credited to somebody else, which is Ellefson, the bassist. Like, this album is all Mustaine. However, Marty Friedman's soloing is definitely a cut above the rest. Probably compared to anyone else that's ever been in this band. Marty Friedman is just one of those guitar players that is not necessarily famous. Like, he's not a household name. It's not like Slash, where you say Slash and all the girls cheer and everybody knows who you're talking about. The guy at the top hat and the Les Paul and whatnot. But in the guitar world, in the world of guitarists, Marty Friedman is an extremely influential guitarist. Maybe, even one of the most influential in his generation. Which is that late 80s to 90s generation of guitar playing. The post-Yngwie era. So yeah, Friedman is definitely like a cut above the rest, so that's why I'm taking some time to talk about him. He's a very tasteful, very emotional, skilled player. He can shred just as fast as anybody else, but he often chooses not to because he prefers to express himself in other ways, being more melodic, using some crazy bends, using some crazy legato, some crazy hammer-ons and all that. Like, he has a lot of different techniques that he uses that's not just shredding, And that's why he's so renowned. He's a very diverse player. He's a very unique player. Very difficult player to imitate. He's a very unique style. And guitar players love him. And we're going to talk about him specifically when we get to Tornado of Souls. But, Holy War is probably Megadeth's most important ever song. So that's that. Then we have Hangar 18, which is a song that has 18 guitar solos. Or at least close to that. The song itself isn't even that special. It's got like a verse, chorus, but then it just shifts entirely into like just kicks into next gear, and just has like back-to-back solo duels between Friedman and Mustaine for the like back half of the song. So it's completely unhinged. Take No Prisoners is one of Megadeth's fastest ever song. It's one of the most relentless thrash songs of all time. It's got the gank vocals. It's a song about war. It's super fast, super difficult riffs, super technical fills, like drum fills, crazy soloing, all that. I'll skip Five Magics for now. I'm going to talk about it in a second. Poison Was the Cure is also very fast song. It's very short. It's the shortest song on the album, not counting Down Patrol, which is just an intro to Polaris. But also very fast, very typically thrashy song with very technical riffs. Lucretia is a little bit of a slower one. It's more of a it's got a lot more of a groovier side to it. Very groovy riff, more of a traditional heavy metal song structure. Very cool solo. Tornado of Souls. This is a very like important song also for Megadeth, because like the song itself isn't even that crazy. Like it's a good song, but it's not, a masterpiece in riffing and arrangement like Holy Wars is. However, Tornado of Souls is blessed by having what is considered by many people to be the best guitar solo in the history of heavy metal. And that's honestly even kind of undisputed. Like, it's not even a Megadeth fan or a thrash metal fan thing. Like, you will find people who listen to all kinds of metal just coming back to this solo and saying, yep, this one hits different, So if you haven't listened to it, definitely, put down the phone, close your, eyes a little bit, and really, like, listen to it, Like, don't just hear it, really listen to it. Because you're going to find a level of dominance over the instrument and a level of ability to express oneself through a melodic instrument that's just kind of unmatched. And it's a thing that it's the one thing that every musician sets out to do. Being able to create something that's just so expressive while still being intense and shreddy and fast and exciting. And that's what Marty Friedman managed with this solo. He created the perfect solo. It has the perfect amount of emotion, expressiveness, excitedness. I don't even know if that's a word, but shreddiness, skill. Like it's got it all, man. So there's a reason it has the reputation that it has. It's definitely deserved. Then there's Dawn Patrol, which is just an intro to Rest in Peace Polaris. And there's Rest in Peace Polaris, which is another very fast, very technical, very intricate thrash song with a somewhat unorthodox arrangement. And then there's a song I left out, which is Five Magics. Now, Five Magics, the reason I left it out, and I'm talking about it now, is because Five Magics is actually my favorite Megadeth song of all time. It's got everything that I could ever want from a Megadeth song. It has a very exotic intro with great ambience and some very interesting melodies. It's got a riff with cool sword and sorcery vocals that are inspired by the Master of Five Magics book, and a couple other things. It's got some insane solos, some crazy like time signature and key changes. Then it's got a very crazy chorus and bridge with some intense thrash riffing and also very cool vocal delivery where Mustaine is kind of having he's shouting out lyrics, and those lyrics are getting echoed by the Abyss Lord, which is the evil entity that the character in the song is fighting. And that's kind of like the climax of the song. And it's just like so well done. Which is, by the way, one of the reasons you need to listen to the original mix and not the remaster, because they re-recorded those vocals and they're just better in the original. And then the song finishes off, like wraps up with one of Mustaine's most, like one of the album's most intense riffs. And over that riff is one of Mustaine's craziest ever guitar solos. Like, compared to Marty Friedman's tasteful, melodic, well-crafted, every note is planned type of soloing, Mustaine's solos, especially in this song, is just like a barrage of notes assaulting your eardrums in the most chaotic way possible. But they just fit together so well, like with the song and the chaotic energy that it's trying to relay, that it, like, you really can't criticize it. Like, it just works. You can criticize his guitar playing, you can say that it's sloppy, but you're still going to be headbanging your neck off to it because it just slaps you like a truck. So yeah, Five Magic is definitely my favorite Megadeth song of all time. If I had to recommend you a single song from the Megadeth catalog to listen to, it would be Holy Wars, because that's the most iconic one and it's got a little bit of everything. But I think that Five Magic also has a little bit of everything. It just appeals to my personal tastes a little bit better because it has some exotic, eccentric things that I really like about it. But yeah, I think that's enough talk about Rest in Peace. Shouldn't be a question where we're going to place it. It's going to be an easy S tier, and it's going to go above Peace Cells. There is some arguments online about whether or not Peace Cells is actually better than Rest in Peace. I can see where they're coming from, but I think they're just wrong. Okay, I don't think it's an argument you should be allowed to make. You can say that it's close, you can say that it's almost as good, but Rest in Peace is about as flawless a record as any metal band has ever written. So, you know, you're not going to make that argument. Let's just go. Let's just go. Alright, Countdown to Extinction. This is Megadeth's second album with Nick Menza and Marty Friedman. And this is also Megadeth's most successful album ever, commercially at least. So this is Megadeth's Black Album, you know, like Metallica's Black Album. Because this album marks not only the peak of Megadeth's commercial success, it also marks the beginning of a shift in their style, entering into the 90s, coming into the 90s, where thrash metal was starting to lose steam, and heavy metal in general was starting to lose steam, as it was losing market space to grunge and other types of more industrial sounding genres. So yeah, this definitely marks a shift in the band forever. Well, not forever. They would eventually come back to their roots somewhat. But it definitely marks a shift that would be quite lasting. Now, is it a bad album? How does it compare to the previous? Well, obviously it's not as good as Rest in Peace. I think we've established that nothing's ever going to top Rest in Peace. So if you were just here to find which one is the top one, well, you can stop watching now. But what I want to talk about is, does Countdown to Extinction deserve to be Megadeth's most successful record commercially? And honestly, I think the answer to that is no. Because honestly, I don't think that this album is that good. Like, it is good, but for being Megadeth's most commercially successful album ever, I don't think it quite lives up to that. Now you'll see that it has a total length of 47 minutes and 26 seconds, which makes it Megadeth's longest album at this point. And looking at some of the tracks here, it's just like, you know? Like, I think this album almost has a rep that increases the way the people's perceptions of the songs. But if you just look at the songs themselves, in my opinion, they're not that crazy. Compared to, you know, everything that came before, and also a lot of things that are going to come after. There are highlights, of course. I'd like to point out that Symphony of Destruction is probably Megadeth's most recognizable song. While I said that Holy Wars is their most iconic song, or their most trademark song, Symphony of Destruction is probably more popular. Probably got some more radio play because it's a little bit less aggressive, a little bit less intense. And, you know, I think it was probably in some Guitar Hero or something like that. So, you know, it's that kind of song. It's the song that people who don't listen to Megadeth listen to. Like, if you're not a fan of Megadeth, if you don't listen to Megadeth and you only know one Megadeth song, it's probably this one. I know that because that was the case to me. Like, I knew this song and I liked this song and I knew that it was from Megadeth, but one day I just realized I've never actually heard any other songs by this band. But I like Symphony of Destruction, so I should probably listen to some other stuff from them. And then you start listening to other Megadeth songs, and you kind of realize that Symphony of Destruction is just an extremely bland and simple song compared to the rest of Megadeth's catalog. So, it is a good song. It's very catchy. It has a cool riff. But it's not really something special, at least not compared to anything in the previous album. And with that being the highlight of Countdown to Extinction, everything else kind of starts to fall a little bit flat. There are some songs that weigh very heavily into concepts, like Psychotron, Captive Honor, Countdown to Extinction. Some of the songs on side 2, like, they lean very heavily into concepts, and they're just not catchy. They just don't have enough musicality to it or enough, highlights to make them very rewarding songs to listen to. Foreclosure of a Dream as well kind of has that. Sweating Bullets is a very fun track. It's probably the most fun you're gonna have in this album after Symphony of Destruction. It has Dave's crazy vocals where he's pretending to be mentally insane, which he probably is, but not to this extent. He does a lot of pretending to be crazy. So that song is something that really highlights that, and that makes it a very fun song to listen to, lightheartedly. You get a laugh out of it, and it is a pretty cool song. But yeah, this album is just I just think it's kind of mid. I don't know if that's a hot take. I feel like it is because it is Megadeth's most commercially successful song. But looking at all the songs in it and listening to them and remembering them, there's just not that much that excites me about them, It has its highs, but generally speaking, I don't think it's that good of a record. It's just kind of mid. Don't get me wrong, nothing in here is exactly bad. There's some things that you just listen to and then you just go, okay. It kind of goes into one year, comes out the other. You don't even remember it. So yeah, it's kind of bland. It has some interesting concepts. Like I said, some songs weigh heavily into concepts. And while those concepts are cool, I just don't think they're enough to carry the album. So this one's going to go actually at the middle here of B tier. I think it's a little bit more remarkable than So Far So Good So What, but it doesn't have the rawness and the energy and the soul that Killing Is My Business has. So yeah, I'm gonna put it here in the middle of B tier. Now, Euthanasia. You've seen me talk smack about Countdown to Extinction. Hold on. I would think the one song people know if they don't listen to Megadeth is Tornado of Souls. Maybe if you're a guitar player. Or just a big metalhead in general. Because Tornado of Souls is known for the solo, okay? Nobody really talks that much about the rest of the song. It's always just about the solo. So if you're not a guitar player, or you're not a big metalhead who makes top 5 best guitar solos in metal history lists, you probably don't know Tornado of Souls. You probably never listened to it. When I talk about Symphony of Destruction being Megadeth's most iconic song, what I mean is that if your grandma knew one Megadeth song, it would probably be that one. That's kind of what I mean. But if you're a guitar player or a huge metalhead, it's probably either Tornado of Souls or Holy Wars. Definitely. Anyways, you've heard me talk smack about Countdown to Extinction. Well, not really smack, but you've heard me call it mid and put it in B tier. So you're probably thinking I'm about to cook these next few albums and drop them, lower and lower. Now here's the thing. Euthanasia is definitely when Megadeth fully shift gears from being a very fast and intense technical thrash band to being a more traditional heavy metal band with some more commercial leanings. Although I would say it's still very far from being, sellout territory. I actually quite like this album, because unlike the previous album, I think this album explores a lot of interesting concepts, and it does all of those concepts very well. Every song in here has an interesting concept that's being talked about, but it's also a very good, very enjoyable song if you just shut off your brain and don't listen to the lyrics. The songs are still perfectly enjoyable. You have songs with really cool riffs like The Killing Road or, Train of Consequences or Blood of Heroes. You have songs with really cool solos like Family Tree, which has one of Marty Friedman's best solos as well. Very underrated. You have songs with cool choruses like Atula Monde, which is one of Megadeth's hits and Megadeth's de facto magnum opus ballad. So, I think this is an extremely well-rounded album with some good heavy songs, some good lighter songs, some commercially inclined songs that are done very well, some very interesting concepts that are explored very well as well. It's a pretty long album. Again, it comes out longer than the previous at almost 50 minutes. And not every song is, intensely worthwhile, which is why it's definitely not going into S tier. But it's a song that you're going to enjoy at least half of. It's an album that you're going to enjoy at least half of it, if not more. It does have a few songs that you kind of forget about, but it definitely has its fair share of highlights, and it's a very well-rounded album in my opinion. So that's gonna go into high B. Actually, no, I'm gonna put it in A. I'm gonna put it in A. It's gonna go into A tier. That's gonna be our first A. It's not an extremely high A, but it's a pretty solid A. And now we move on to Cryptic Writings. Now, Cryptic Writings is a similar album to Euthanasia in the sense that it has more commercially inclined songs, although it still has quite a bit of heavy songs, some fast songs, and I think it's also a very well-rounded album. It's a pretty commercially successful album as well. If you go here, you can see it's got some decent chart placements, as did Euthanasia. It's not certified platinum, but it's still certified gold, which is pretty good. So it's a decently successful album, and you can see now that it's got a lot more writing credits to Marty Friedman and sometimes Nick Menza. So that's a sign of things to come, and that's a sign of the changing times. I said earlier that, sometimes the other musicians start to take a hold of Megadeth and it start to become less of Dave's solo project and more of a group effort. And this album is definitely the beginning of that to some extent. You could argue that even as early as Countdown to Extinction was the beginning of that. But this is where it starts to become really obvious that it's not just Dave calling the shots. It's also not just the band either. There's a lot of pressure from the studios and from the management because metal is changing and the radios want different things to play. So there's a lot of, pressure behind the scenes as well that are motivating these different creative decisions. But it's also from within the band. So in my opinion, generally this album is just pretty much on par with Euthanasia. I think it actually has some higher highs with Trust, She-Wolf, and A Secret Place being excellent tracks. Like, I think these 3 tracks are probably S tier. The rest of the album is A or B tier. Some of these songs are really give or take. I think Use the Man is pretty cool. It's got like a acoustic vibe to it. It's pretty cool. I think most of it is give or take, but I think it has higher highs and lower lows than Euthanasia. But on average, I think they're both on par. So I'm going to put it on A tier as well. Now, before we go on to Risk, we actually have to talk about not cryptic ratings. We have to talk about Hidden Treasures here. Now, Hidden Treasures isn't a studio album, it's more of like an EP. And it's not even like an EP. It's kind of like a compilation of unreleased songs. So I'm not going to talk about it too much. I'm just going to glance over it and say that Angry Again is probably the only song from here that is actually good enough to deserve to be on a full LP. Everything else was either done for some movie soundtrack or something like that, or it's just, not great. It's just like, okay. So I think this one is definitely one that you only go to if you're a massive Megadeth fan. Otherwise, Angry Again is the only song you might ever hear from this album, because it's the only one that ever gets any attention. It's the only one that gets played live at all. So yeah, I'm just gonna chuck this one into C tier and we'll move on. It's just not that worthwhile. The only song I really recommend from it is Angry Again. And that brings us to Risk. Now, Risk is definitely Megadeth's most controversial album. It's got Nick Menza left. We got a new drummer in, whose name you don't need to know, but it's Jimmy DeGrasso. He's not going to be important to the story, but just so you know, Nick Menza left. So this is the beginning of the end of the legendary Megadeth lineup, the Rest in Peace lineup, as it's often referred to. There's no more Nick Menza. There's new people, new drummer. Now, Marty Friedman is still here. And you'll see that a lot of the songs in this album are credited to some other people. Like some singers, some other guys, like this Bud Prager guy or whatever. And also, all of them are credited to Marty Friedman, which is not something that you see on the previous albums. So you can see everything that doesn't have Mustaine written on here is also credited to Marty Friedman. So you can see that Marty was involved in the writing of this album quite a bit. And that's one of the things that people point to when they argue that, Marty just didn't want to play metal anymore. He was tired of being in a thrash band, so he tried to transform Megadeth into something else, and it didn't work. Now, when people talk about this album, there's two sides of the story. There's people who say that this album sucks, that this is Megadeth definitely selling out, and that it's a terrible album, it's a terrible Megadeth album, and that you shouldn't listen to it. And then on the other side of the conversation, you have people who say that, no, actually this album is kind of underrated. It's not a bad album. People just hate on it because it doesn't quite sound like Rest in Peace. And here's the thing, both sides are right. Because this album doesn't suck. It's not a bad album. But it is a bad Megadeth album. Because this almost isn't a Megadeth album at all. Like if it wasn't released under the Megadeth moniker and you listened to it, and it didn't have Dave Mustaine's voice all over it, you wouldn't, like, just from the instrumentals, you'd probably not be able to tell that it's Megadeth at all. Because it just has like, so many different ideas that are not, completely violating Megadeth's traditional songwriting and compositions and style of riffing, that it's just unidentifiable as a Megadeth song, as a Megadeth album. And because of that, I'll tell you that the first 2 songs on this album, Insomnia and Prince of Darkness, are the best 2 songs. Although they're not quite as good as anything on Rust in Peace, they're still pretty good songs. And the reason they're pretty good songs is because they are the ones that retain Megadeth's identity the best. The rest of the songs are really give or take. Some of them have interesting concepts, some of them not really. Some of them are well executed, some of them not really. Generally speaking, a very mediocre effort, and it's definitely too long. It overstays its welcome at 51 minutes. You can see that the albums are getting longer and longer, and that really they're starting to just get to the point where they would benefit from just having some fat cut off. But yeah, definitely this album is, the first one you can really just skip. Like, even if you're a Megadeth fan, you're not missing out on much if you skip this one. So that's going to be our first D tier. But this is where I have to remind you, it's going on D tier not because it's a bad album. It's going on D tier because it's a bad Megadeth album. Okay? This album was released by any other metal band that isn't like a super extreme thrash band. Like if this album was released by, I don't know, frickin' Motley Crue or something, you wouldn't be hating, like it wouldn't be hated nearly as much. In fact, I'm pretty sure Motley Crue's 90s output doesn't hold a candle to Risk. So it's just that it doesn't fit what Megadeth ought to be. You have like very poppy songs, very mellow songs. It's just not Megadeth. So while it's not a terrible album, and if you really like metal or hard rock, it's still going to be an album that you're probably going to enjoy. As a Megadeth album, it ain't it. Alright, let's talk about The World Needs a Hero now. Enter the 2000s. This album was released in May 15th of 2001. About 2 weeks before I was born, actually. This album was released. And you can see right here, at the very top of the Wikipedia page, after the critical and commercial failure of the previous album Risk, The World Needs a Hero represented a change back to a heavier musical direction. And as you can see, it was more successful than Risk, generally charting better, although it is not certified. None of the albums hereafter are, but it was still a more successful album than Risk. And the first album, after guitarist Marty Friedman left, he was replaced by a guy named Al Pitrelli. And while he's not exactly important to the Megadeth story, because this is the only album he's going to be featured in, I will say that Al Pitrelli is an extremely underrated guitarist overall. and that I love his contributions to this album, and I love his guitar playing as a whole. There's a live album that Megadeth did with him called Rude Awakening, which is from this era, and that DVD, that live album is a banger, man. Al Pitrelli just rocks, because he has a very distinct style from most of the other guitarists that were in Megadeth, and he just owns it. He just makes all the solos, all the songs his own. He puts his own style into them in a way that retains faithfulness to the originals while also having a lot of personality of their own. So I really like Al Pitrelli's contribution to this album, and this is generally an album that's kind of got a little bit of a bad reputation to it. Like, people see this album as like Megadeth just trying to go back to their roots, but failing at it. They see it as like, hey, at least it's not Risk, but it's still not good. You know, that's the general perception of this album, at least from my experience seeing people talk about it. But I'm going to tell you that this is an album that I really, really like. I think this album has a lot of very interesting concepts, and it has, like, in some ways it has a very simplistic songwriting, and in other ways it has some of that complexity of the arrangements that we really love from Megadeth. Although generally speaking it's a slower album than Megadeth's all-time thrash classics, like, this album doesn't have any, like, slammer speed songs. It's got a lot of really interesting ambience. It's got a lot of really cool melodies, some cool riffs, some cool solos. You know, it's got the full recipe. It's just not as fast as some of the older records. And I feel like because it lacks some of that intensity, that's one of the reasons people hate it, or people try to hate it. But I think there's definitely a lot of material here that is very worthwhile. Dread and the Fugitive Mind is probably Megadeth's second best guitar solo after Tornado of Souls, which is a very high bar to clear, and I'm giving that second place. I'm giving that silver medal to Al Pitrelli, a guy who's not going to show up on any other record again. So if you don't listen to anything else, at least give this one song a try, okay? Dread and the Fugitive Mind. Disconnect has one of the best atmospheres in a metal song I've ever heard. The bridge section in the middle of the song has this, like, super cool riff, switching between some major and minor chords, like a dominant fifth major chord and then a minor root chord, and also a major sixth chord, which is, you know, may not mean anything to you, but when you listen to it, you'll know that it sounds really cool. It's almost like got a classical sound to it. Then you've got some more, like, especially towards the back end of this, the album here, you've got some more experimental songs. Silent Scorn is a short instrumental. You've got Promises, which has some orchestral elements to it. Recipe for Hate Warhorse is a song that also has a very unusual structure. Return to Hangar is a sequel to Hangar 18, also featuring a lot of crazy solos and all that. It's probably the fastest song in this album. And When is a very long song with a very weird structure also. It doesn't even have super complex riffs and ideas, but it's just a bunch of ideas tied together in a way as if to tell a story. And I'm not going to say it's great, but it's definitely interesting. So while I think this album is pretty solid and I think it gets way too much hate, I think that at 57 minutes and 49 seconds, it definitely overstays its welcome a little bit. So yeah, it's you know, it's pretty good. If you're a fan of Megadeth, you should enjoy this album. But if you're not, if you're just here for the bangers, this one is one that you're probably going to be okay with skipping. So yeah, I'm going to put this one in B as well. Personally, I put it higher than Countdown to Extinction. Although I think that's going to be a very controversial pick. I might even put it higher than Killing Is My Business, but just because it's too long and I feel like it overstays its welcome a little bit, it goes here. I'm still like, I'd still rather listen to this album than Countdown to Extinction though. Like it's definitely an album that has a lot of interesting ideas, gets my attention more. Alright, that brings us to The System Has Failed. We're gonna start speedballing some of these a little bit, because from here on out it gets a little less important, like what happens in between each album. This album has a return of Chris Poland, the guitar player from the first and second albums. And this is generally considered to be Megadeth's de facto return to form by some people. It has, you know, basically all the trash solos and fast riffing that the previous album didn't have. Those are back on this album. So the reason people hate the previous album sometimes is because it lacked the intensity and the thrashiness that Megadeth are known for. And this is the first album that really makes an active effort to bring that back. It's at 48:24 runtime, which is, you know, we're starting to go backwards. We were going like up and up and up with longer albums. Now we're starting to go back. Now we're starting to cut back a little bit. So, you know, 48-minute runtime. Starts with Blackmail the Universe, which is just, you know, straight up banger, fast riffing, double bass drum. But it's still got quite a lot of interesting concepts in the middle here. There are songs that I really like on this album, like The Scorpion, which is one of my favorite Megadeth songs. Truth Be Told is really cool. What else? Back in the Day is, you know, a very fun song. Kick the Chair is cool. Like, there's a lot of really cool songs here. I think my favorites are probably The Scorpion and Blackmail the Universe from this album. But all of the songs are cool. There's no sleepers on this one. There's a few, like more towards the end, like My Kingdom, that are kind of sleepers. I wouldn't say sleepers, but like the album kind of tapers off a little bit towards the end. Like, it doesn't suck, but I think that it definitely, the highlights are in the first half, or at least, you know, maybe more a little. It's a bit top heavy. That's a lot of word salad just to say that it's a bit top heavy. But it still doesn't suck. Like, I still like these tracks back here. I think My Kingdom is a song that gets a bit of hate. People say that it's a really weak closer to the album. I've never thought of it as it. I think it has a cool rhythm to it. But yeah, it's definitely not nearly as intense as the album Starters. So it's an album that's a bit top heavy, and it definitely tapers off. But it's an album that's generally more critically acclaimed than the previous, and that has some of those bangers, some of those fast, thrashy songs that the previous album lacked. So because of that, it's gonna go here. I'm actually gonna put it above Killing Is My Business. Or maybe not. Maybe we'll just put it above The World Needs a Hero. You know, Killing Is My Business, while being so simple, it still has that charm to it. Also has that classic status to it. You can't hate on it. Alright, and that takes us to United Abominations. Now, United Abominations. I think this might be the most surprising. Like, if you don't know me enough, this might be the most surprising pick on the list. Generally speaking, I think this album is a high A tier. I think it has the best things from The World Needs a Hero, and also the best things from The System Has Failed. It has the fast, thrashy riffs in songs like Washington Is Next, Burnt Ice, even Sleepwalker a little bit. It has interesting concepts in songs like Play for Blood, Sleepwalker. You know, it's a very political album. This is the start of like the super schizo conspirate boomer Megadeth, at least de facto. You know, like this is really where like that goes out the door, or that gets thrown into the fan, which personally I love, but obviously a lot of people hate because Megadeth like doesn't only have conservative fans. But you know, I think it's based. So like this album has strong opener, strong closer, crazy guitar solo that ends that wraps up this song, by the way. At the end of the album, like the album just ends on like 7th gear, which is really a blast if you're listening to from front to back. Like it's really rewarding to get to the end and you just have your face melted off by shredding. It's very, very rewarding. I'd say that the only weak point in the album is this re-recording of A Tout Le Monde, which isn't as good as the original. So honestly, this one you can skip. It doesn't fit the album thematically, and it's not as good as the original A Tout Le Monde. So like, yeah, you can skip this one. Everything else I think you're going to enjoy one way or another. It's got cool concepts, it's got cool riffs, it's got great soloing by Chris Broderick, albeit a bit too shreddy. Like, Chris Broderick is a guitar player that's a bit just more on the too many notes side, but he's still a great guitar player, so you're going to have fun listening to this album. And normally, if I were to just place it on the ranking here, I would put it on A tier, probably at the top of A tier because I really like that album. But I'm gonna make a controversial call here, and I'm actually gonna put United Abominations at the bottom of S tier. And what bumps it from high A to bottom S is not the music itself. It's the fact that this album got a letter of repudiation from the UN. Like, you can see here, on July 10th, 2007, a rebuttal was posted by Mark Leon Goldberg on the UN Dispatch blog against the accusations made in the title track of the album, United Abominations. Goldberg reviewed the song verse by verse, pointing out what he believed were false accusations. The blog stated that we at UN Dispatch refused to let Megadeth's witless screed go unchallenged. We listened to the song so you don't have to. I mean, if your album is getting like a freaking like debunked a letter from the UN, like a debunked blog post from the UN, like that shit is instantly S tier, man. Even if the songs are ass, that would be an instant S tier for me. And here's the thing, it has that mythical status, while the songs, like the album itself, is also really good. So just because of that, I'm gonna bump it to S tier. But if it was just the music, it'd be high A. But because it has that legendary blog post by the UN debunking the album, it gets that S tier bump. Definitely listen to it if you're a Megadeth fan, if you're a thrash fan. This album is gonna uh, really entertain you. It's also extremely well produced, by the way. I should mention that. I think it's an album that sounds great. The mixing and the mastering and the recordings. Alright, that takes us to Endgame. Now, Endgame is very similar to United Abominations, so I don't have to talk about it as much. It's a little bit less political, like it has some very political songs, like Endgame, the title track. Everything else is not as political. It has some really good songs, some really heavy songs, like Head Crusher, This Day We Fight. Dialectic Chaos is also really fast song with a lot of shredding. Fast song. And then you have some heavier ones like Bodies, How the Story Ends, which are 44 minutes, which are slower but really heavy songs. Head Crusher is another fast one. Personally, I think my favorite song on this album is the last one, which is The Right to Go Insane. I think it's a really fun song, and they did that video with the tank, which is really cool if you haven't seen. But yeah, I think it's a song that I really like. Closes out the album really well, and I think it's just kind of United Abominations Part 2. But I think that it has maybe the lows are a bit higher, but I think the peaks are definitely not as high, and then the average is a little bit under it. So it's gonna go here, probably above Risk, but beneath Euthanasia. But it's definitely a solid album. Maybe actually even beneath Risk. Sorry, not Risk. Cryptic Ratings. Probably like a bottom A. It's just, solid album, but it's got some songs that are really like give or take. They're still good songs. They're still enjoyable songs, but they're not enough to set it apart from the rest of the albums, from the rest of the material. Definitely the highlights I would suggest are The Right to Go Insane, the title track, Endgame, Head Crusher, and that's probably it, honestly. Maybe This Day We Fight, which is also a song that's really cool if you're into the heavier, faster, more thrashy songs. The Hardest Part of Letting Go, if you like a little ballad. There's a little bit of everything in this album. It's just that the best parts of it aren't as good as the best parts of United Abominations. Alright. And now we enter the 2010s with 13. Now, 13 marked the return of Dave Ellison to the band, the bassist. He left after The World Needs a Hero because he had a feud with Mustaine. There was even like a court case involved or something like that. But, whatever. We're not going to talk about that. But yeah, this is the album. He returns to the band, and he would stay up until the last one. And honestly, this is one of the albums where it's like Megadeth are doing what they usually do, but it's just not good. So it's like it's just not a great album. Like, there's a few songs in here that are cool. My personal favorite is We the People. I think it has great lyrics, and it's a very fun, groovy song. But a lot of the other songs, like Sudden Death, Public Enemy #1, I think they're trying a bit too hard to be classics, and they just missed the mark. And then some of these songs on the bottom here, like pretty much the entire B half, like After Never Dead or After Guns, Drugs, and Money, like pretty much the entire like B half of the album is just like I hardly even remember what these songs sound like. And I re-listened to these albums like not long ago in preparation for this stream. So it's like it's got a few highs, but everything else is super forgettable. And at almost an hour, it's also definitely overstaying its welcome. So yeah, 13, I'm gonna put it here. Probably a bit higher than Hidden Treasures. That's more just because it's a full album and not just a compilation of tracks. But yeah, it's you can skip this one. You're not missing out. And, you know, we were just talking about how you're not missing out if you're skipping 13. I think that if you're skipping Super Collider, I think you're actually doing yourself a favor. This is the last album with Broderick, and it's got a few cool things about it. Like, Built for War is a pretty cool song. Kingmaker is a pretty cool song. My personal favorite is the first half of Dance in the Rain. It has an ending section featuring David Draymond from Disturbed, and I think that part of the song is like dog water. But the first half of the song is really cool. It's my favorite bit of the album. Unfortunately, I have to skip the rest of the song halfway through it because I just don't really like the ending of this song at all. But the first part is great. So this song has, you know, like a little tiny bit of things that are cool, and everything else is just like, oh no, I don't remember anything about this album, even though I just listened to it. Everything else is just slop. So even though it's a heavy album, even though it has some fast songs, even though it's got some bangers, some cool stuff in it, honestly, I can't excuse putting this album any higher than D tier. It's still gonna be like above Risk just because it has more of Megadeth's identity to it. But personally, if I had to pick an album to listen to, I would listen to Risk over Super Collider. The only reason it's going to be higher in the rank is because it sounds more like Megadeth, but this is Megadeth at its worst when it comes to, you know, their own style. Public Enemy number 1 and 13 I really like. Yeah, they're cool. It's just, you know, they don't really hold a candle to the other Megadeth singles from the other albums or any of the Megadeth classic songs. Like I said at the start of the stream, I don't think Megadeth has any terrible albums. It's just, you know, some of them aren't as worthwhile as others. And, alright, as we enter the final stretch here, we have the last 2 albums, which are going to feature Kiko Loureiro on guitar, the Brazilian guitarist from the power metal band Angra, or Angra, as you probably call them in the US. So yeah, let's talk about Dystopia. I think Dystopia is a pretty solid album. Dystopia actually won a Grammy, so this is Megadeth's only album to ever win a Grammy. Won the Best of Metal Performance album. And it was also their highest charting album in a long time. So it's definitely a return to form after 2 disappointing albums, in my opinion. And I think a lot of it has to do with Kiko, but most of it has to do with Mustaine. Because this is really where Mustaine just locked in and said, okay, I know what I'm doing, so just let me cook. This is Megadeth's thrashiest album since Rust in Peace, okay? I want to make that very clear. This is Megadeth's thrashiest, fastest, most intense album since Rust in Peace. And while it's not quite Rust in Peace, songs like The Threat is Real, Fatal Illusion, Conquer or Die Lying in Stage, very, very intense tracks. Um, Dystopia has a lot of the soloing, the crazy song structure, like Hangar 18 does. Fatal Illusion, I believe it is, has a really cool bass intro, has, you know, really crazy riffs, almost like a Killing Is My Business tier, with like the weird rhythms that almost sound like it's a different time signature. Post American World, a bit of a slower song, but with really, really heavy riffs. Really cool song as well. I think this album doesn't really have any low points. And that's what does it for me. Like, maybe its highs don't hold a candle to Rust in Peace or even Peace Cells or any of the Megadeth classics. But I think that every song in here is cool. And if you just want some metal thrash bangers to headbang to, you're going to have a blast listening to this album. So it's definitely going to go an A for me. Beneath everything else, I think. Maybe above Endgame. But yeah, it's still an A. And that brings us to the last album, the most recent Megadeth album, which is The Sick, the Dying, and the Dead. This is the longest album gap, the longest gap between albums in the history of the band's career. It was 6 years between Dystopia and this one. And it was the second and last album to feature Kiko. Now, unfortunately, this is the only the second and last album to feature Kiko. But that's because Kiko was in the band for so long, but it just took them so long to do this album because there was the pandemic right in the middle. So this album was delayed by quite a bit because of that. So yeah. It's like, you know, weird. But I think this album does... this album isn't even that critically acclaimed. I think it's got good reviews, and it's got a good... it was well received by the fans. But, personally, I think that this album does everything that Dystopia did even better. So it's got higher highs, definitely higher highs than Dystopia, while also not having really many lows. Like, there's a few songs in here that are kind of sleepers, or at least, you know, I'm not going to say they're sleepers, but they are kind of songs that you enjoy a couple times, and then they lose a little bit of their magic after a few listens. I'd probably say that about, like, Soldier On, maybe Celebutante. You know, some of these songs, like, they lose a little bit of their shine after you've heard them a few times. But I still wouldn't say they're filler songs. I think they're pretty good songs. And I think this song has probably some of Megadeth's best lyricism in a while. I've talked before, I think, about some, not on stream, but, you know, personally, I've talked before about how some of these songs have very interesting concepts that are laid out lyrically in a way that's very interesting, not necessarily on the nose. So this is one of the albums that, hey, you're gonna, if you like it, go check out the lyrics. There's some interesting things here. And it's got some really thrashy bangers. It's got some slower songs with some, you know, more interesting compositions. It's got quite a few contributions from Kiko in terms of riffs and also in terms of melodies and, you know, general songwriting and structuring and all of that. And I think Kiko has a lot of interesting influences to bring to Megadeth because he has a background in, you know, Brazilian music, but also a background in power metal with Angra. So if you listen to a song like Sacrifice, you're going to hear a few things there that are kind of not typical, but if you look deep into it, you can kind of hear a little bit of an influence from more of that power metal background of some of the way that the songs are structured and the riffs are constructed. So there's a little bit of that going on. You have some more quirky, weirder songs like Mission to Mars. You have the classic song that starts out slow and then gets really fast in Dogs of Chernobyl. So, you know, this album has a little bit of everything, a little bit of all the classic Megadeth formulas, and I think it does all of it pretty well. So yeah, this album is definitely going to place higher than Dystopia, and because it has higher highs, I think I'll place it higher than Cryptic Ratings as well, putting it there in the middle of A tier. So yeah, I think that's it. I think that's our tier list. We've got most albums in A and B tier, which is what you'd expect anyways. We've got the trifecta of Megadeth albums, which is what I personally consider, you know, if you're gonna listen to Megadeth, you'll listen to these 3 albums. And while Rust in Peace and Peace Sells are the absolute classics, the first ones you should listen to, and I did mention, you know, the UN thing being the reason for United Abominations being S tier. I think that another reason it's that it's an album that greatly exemplifies the modern Megadeth sound, you know, because it's still like 17 years older than Rust in Peace, so there was quite a gap between these 2 albums. Not just the band's sound as in their composition, but also the production, the recording, the mixing, the mastering. It's massively evolved in that time period. So it's definitely the best introduction, in my opinion, to the modern Megadeth sound. So those are the 3 albums that you're mandated to listen to, lest I break into your house and smack you with a shovel. If you like those 3 albums, you are more than welcome to listen to all 5 of those albums in A tier. You can go for Euthanasia and Cryptic Writings if you like some of the softer, slightly more commercial heavy metal. And you can go for The Sick, the Dying, and the Dead, the Dystopia, and Endgame if you like the faster, thrashier stuff. And then, you know, based off that, if you really like those as well, you can move on to B tier, and, you know, so on and so forth. Although I will say that unless you're an extreme Megadeth fan like I am, you can leave out tiers C and D. Those are the ones you can really skip on and you won't be missing out on much. So yeah, that's our Megadeth tier list and the end of Richie Roxx Academy number 2. Unfortunately, I didn't get to talk about some of these albums and some of these songs as much as I'd like to. I tried to be as fast as I could, and we're still closing in on 2 hours of stream. So very quickly, I'm going to open up for any questions you guys may have. If you'd like to ask about any songs, if you'd like to ask about any albums, this is your chance. And that's going to mark the end of our stream. Post-American World is the best track on this album. Super good. Yeah, I really like that one as well. I think it's got a really cool vibe to it. The riff is quite evil. And you know I like evil riffs. Alright. Doesn't look like we have any questions. That's good. That means I did a good job ranting to you guys. So yeah, that's going to be all for tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed this edition of Roxx Music Academy. There will be a vote for the next episode, probably. Although I'm very inclined to just do Yngwie, since I have to prepare less for that one, because I've heard all of Yngwie's records a lot. But we'll see. I'll think about whether or not you guys deserve a vote. But yeah, that's gonna be all for tonight. Hope you guys had fun. Hope you guys learned something. Hope you guys found some new music to listen to and enjoy. And yeah, that's gonna be all for tonight. God bless you all. Have a good week. Bye-bye.